I know we're starting a bit late this evening, but we wanted you to first enjoy some supper and settle. And so I think we're going to start officially with the program right now. If Prof. Nkosi would like to come to the stage, please, and do- and Thandi to the stage. Yes, let's do. And our keynote as well, please, to the stage. Yeah. Yes, just. And then Mr. Khotsumuwabe, if you can also come to the stage, please. Thank you so much. And Zandi, Mazandi, Radebe, has she arrived? She can also come to the stage, please. So I'm not sure where Zandi is, but she'll probably join us shortly. So good evening again, everyone. My name is Hawa Ismail. I'm a senior researcher at the Institute for Social and Health Sciences at the University of South Africa. It is an honor and a pleasure to welcome everyone here this evening to the 19th Annual Peace, Safety and Human Rights Memorial Lecture. This important event is co-hosted by the University of South Africa, the Psychological Society of South Africa, and the Pan-African Psychology Union. We are delighted to have you join us here this evening in person for the first time after COVID, and which also coincides with the 4th International Conference on Indigenous Knowledge Systems and Practices. For those unfamiliar with this lecture series, it aims to explore new frontiers in addressing challenges related to peace, safety, and human rights in South Africa as well as globally. It highlights critical issues of freedom, citizenship, and social justice, encouraging meaningful action towards these ideals. The series pays tribute to two remarkable freedom fighters, the late Minister Abdullah Umar, South Africa's first democratically elected Minister of Justice, and Mr. Joe Mugabe, a dedicated anti-apartheid activist. Their legacies inspire us to pursue justice and peace in all our endeavors. On behalf of UNISA's Institute for Social and Health Sciences, the Pan-African Psychology Union, and Psychological Society of South Africa, I would like to also extend a warm welcome to the Umar and Muwabi families. Thank you for honoring us with your presence here today. We are also privileged to welcome our esteemed deanery from the University of South Africa, our keynote speaker Dr. Thandi Gamedze from the Desmond Tutu Center for Religion and Social Justice. Also a warm welcome to Zandi Radebe from all this, sorry, from the University of South Africa, who will be this evening's respondent. I extend a warm and special welcome to our distinguished guests, participants, and all attendees joining us here tonight, all protocols observed. So this lecture provides a valuable platform for critical engagement with some of the most pressing issues we face today. It offers us a chance to exchange ideas, build connections, and explore practical solutions for creating safer, more just, and peaceful societies. As we achieve peace and safety, we know this is a complex and multifaceted process, and so it demands collaboration across disciplines, sectors, and borders. At the heart of this work is the unwavering belief that the dignity of every person must be upheld, protected, and honored. To begin this special evening, please join me in welcoming Thandiwe Nganda to the stage for a poetic performance. Thandiwe is a South African performance poet and the author of No Time to Mourn, as well as the choreo poem play Grieve. This is How You Survive. She has engaged in both local and international initiatives, including the 16 Days of Activism campaign. In 2021, she showcased her work with a performance of Energy on Totally Radio in the UK, as well as participated in the Word and Sound Poetry Slam in 2020. In 2022, she served as a guest poet for the State of the Nation and has since collaborated with various jazz musicians throughout her literary career. Thandi, the stage is yours.
Good evening. How are we doing today? Just going to tighten this a little bit. There we go. I think it's perfect. Thank you. With morning, there is no full stop. There's always an ellipsis to it. It shows up every time. It is always rising before you do. It does not break with dawn, nor does it part with the clouds. It is timeless. Even when the clock is on your hands, it is steadfast, and it comes in prayer sometimes, or in tears, and maybe as liquor disguised, convincing you that there is nothing else to live for. It reminds you of who you do not have anymore and how you will spend the rest of your life without them. And in knowing this, you struggle and you forget how to breathe sometimes. And with this, you tend to miscarry your grief, your tears and yourself most times. Your smile dismantles every time you realize that these losses are weighing on you. They are fracturing your back. And in your breaking moments, you grow the habit of calling your deadbeat father for comfort. And in this, you learn that you are deadbeat too to your emotions. And with this, you understand that you are not any better. You are your father's son. You neglect and you forget yourself most times. And with this, you learn to fall apart with him. You learn to understand that he too is sinking in despondency, and that he was 20 when he buried himself with his father, because he was all he had back then. See, these are the things we learn when we are grieving. These are the places we find ourselves in when we are grieving. And these are the times we need to learn that grief is life-changing. I am Thandi Gamedze, and I am a poet and author who aims to open up room for people to speak about their grief and to process it in different artistic spaces, including theater and poetry. The first piece was titled With Morning, and the second one is titled Stillness. I hope you enjoy it. Stillness. We need to learn that there is still beauty in stillness, in the air that flows, in not knowing, in trying to figure it all out. There is enough patience, enough grace to give to yourself, enough love and space and room to understand, to give time to parts of yourself that do not know how to grow, where to go from here, whatever the next step is, whether the next season bears disasters or victories, regardless of it all, there is still beauty in stillness, as the waters have revealed to us, that we won't always come onto the shore rushing and knowing. We won't always be high in tide. We will flow. We will breathe. The trees have displayed that we won't always have green, healthy leaves. Sometimes they will be yellow, brown, and sometimes those will fall off, and there will be nothing. For many nights, there will be nothing. But they will be yellow again. The green leaves on the branches, you will get familiar with the cycle. You will learn to understand that sometimes the best of you is not required in some seasons. You won't be there because you deserve better. You deserve to be met with goodness, light, love. Therefore, you will shed and be rebirthed again. As the fire has shown us, that for the most part we will be set alight, but eventually we will be dust. And it's okay to be a dust, as you would be a dust that was once burning in the most beautiful way. You will be remembered for your resilience, and there will never ever be a fire like you. Thank you. I wrote that piece when I actually lost my job, and I realized that maybe I am a part of nature. Sometimes I shed, sometimes, I grow, and that's how we are as human beings. And I hope that in this space, in the place that we're in, we can find that knowledge, or we can, center ourselves around knowing that there is a season for everything. I hope there is at least one person or two people who needed to hear that tonight. The next one is titled to my brothers and fathers, and I hope you enjoy it. For the many times you put your bodies in the fire, for the many times you show up wrecked by the winds and the waters of this world, may you be located by strength. May a plate filled with love renew you. May you find mother's hug waiting for you at the center of every inconvenience. May kindness run to you always, care, and all the things this world refuses to give you. Know that you are worthy to be taken care of, worthy to be heard, worthy to be left whole, not parts of you, not what you're able to provide, but for who you are, your heart. You deserve to be loved for who you are, your heart. May the struggles you face not be the only thing that you know. May grace find you. May your hands be filled full of your greatest desires. May you always remember that you matter. All the bones in you matter. All the brokenness in you matters. You matter, and you will always matter. Thank you so much.
Iwe, for that stirring and powerful rendition. What a beautiful way and powerful way to open this year's lecture. Let's give her another round of applause. So in the spirit of the late Minister Abdullah Omar and Mr. Joe Muwabi's pursuit of justice and peace, let us now observe a moment of silence for the countless lives lost globally, Congo, Sudan, Yemen, and the ongoing genocide in Palestine. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Executive Dean of the College of Human Sciences, Professor Nkosi, who will deliver the opening message. Prof. Nkosi is the Executive Dean of the College of Human Sciences at the UNISA, or University of South Africa. She has earned her PhD from UKZN in 2010 and joined UNISA as an Associate Professor in 2011. Coincidentally, I also started my journey as a master's intern in the same year at UNISA. She achieved full professorship in 2014, and with a world of wealth of teaching experience, including roles in UAE and UKZN, Prof. Nkosi has supervised over 50 postgraduate students across several African countries. Her global presence is marked by presentations in over 25 countries and internationally teaching roles in Germany and Australia. A passionate advocate for student support, she launched initiatives like the Student Retention Unit and the CHS Disability Unit to enhance retention, mentorship, and inclusivity. And her mantra, as most of us at UNISA know, is lift as you rise. And this exemplifies her commitment to mentorship and leadership. We are especially grateful to have Prof. Nkosi here with us this evening, given her demanding schedule. Prof. Nkosi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ismail. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we are having representatives from 12 countries. I will try and greet you all in your language. Okay, let's start from our colleagues from India. Namaste. From Indonesia, Selamat Malam. Our colleagues from Philippines, in the morning we said Kumesta. This evening we are saying Magandang Gabi. Am I right? Yes. And we've got a colleague from Rwanda, Miriwe. Is she around? Mirin. And from Kenya, Jambo. And from Botswana, it's Dumela. From Mozambique, I hope I got it correct, Manapo or Comesta. And then for South Africa, we've got 12. In the morning, we covered almost all of them. But there is this special group that have got morning, midday, and good evening. In the morning, we say the Macheron. And then during the day, we said the Masiara, and now we are saying the Matekwan. Yes, I hope I've covered everybody. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. As the program director stated, I'm Prof. ZZ Nkosi. I believe in that when we rise, we need to lift others. That's how we can make sure that this world is the better place to live in. So on behalf of the UNISA management, our Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor and the CHS Dinari here present, I would love to welcome you all in this evening's exciting event, the 19th Annual Peace, Safety and Human Rights Memorial Lecture. If you look into the three variables that are in this theme, you will notice that as the world, we are all aspiring to live in a peaceful country. And all of us, we aspire to ensure that there is safety and security around us. And then everybody needs to be treated with respect as we are observing the human rights. So the lecture series is intended to memorialize Abdullah Omar and Joe Moabi, two of South Africans' most uncompromising voices in the struggle of justice. I would love the young scholars in the room to read more about these two giants that we are celebrating today, because they'll understand the struggle that they went through so that we are the South Africa we are today. These two giants, they really supported the agenda. And I can say that Abdullah Omar and Joe Moabi fought bravely and with steadfast determination against inequality and oppression. Today, we are reaping the rewards that were fought by these two men. Their legacies are a reminder that the fight against oppression and injustice is far from over, and that we too must commit ourselves to protecting and enhancing equality and freedom, both of which belong to all of us. As such, the lecture series aims to create a space in which we can grapple with the enduring challenges facing South Africa and the world today. Each lecture in this series takes seriously what peace, safety, human rights, and social justice mean, both historically and in our own time. The College of Human Sciences expresses its gratitude to the Moabi and Omar families for joining us today in upholding and advancing the legacies of Abdullah Omar and Joe Moabi. At the forefront of these legacies is the struggle for justice, which, as we'll see tonight, is always also the struggle to imagine things otherwise. One of our objectives as a College of Human Sciences is to make sure that there is social justice in whatever we do. So the lecture series speaks to that. I implore all of us tonight to hold each of these concepts together throughout the proceedings: justice and imagination. We imagine a world that is safe and secure for all of us. The College of Human Sciences is among the largest colleges at UNISA. Now I'm recruiting for you to come to UNISA. As a College of Human Sciences, we've got a School of Arts, the School of Social Sciences, and the School of Humanities. With the arts, we are dealing with all the 12 languages that are here: linguistic, information science, and communication science. With the School of Humanities, we are dealing with all types of theology. If you really think of religious studies, systematic theology, practical theology, biblical Asian studies, Old Testament, New Testament, whatever you need, we can offer you. Anthropology, history. And then with the School of Social Sciences, we are a mini social sciences. ISHS is dealing with sciences, social sciences. So that's where you can find some of our work, where we deal with nursing, social work, development studies, psychology. That's what ISHS is known of. Psychology, development, and political sciences. That's where Miss Thandi Gamedze, I nearly said doctor. So, yes. So, colleagues, it's just to share with you that we are one of the biggest with 52,000 students and 740 staff members. So we really appreciate the collaboration that you are having here today in support of our mantra, which is social justice. ISHS is one of our institutes, and we are having the partnership with PAPU and PSY SSA. We wish to thank the ISHS and its partners for the work that have been done to facilitate this evening's proceedings. It is so important today to hold space for people to collectively discuss and grapple with the prevalent issues that are facing us today. At the College of Human Sciences, we are so excited, we are energized, we are committed to engaging seriously with this evening lecture's topic, namely what it means to struggle over our imaginative capacities. Earlier on, I said, let us think of these two variables, which is justice and imagination. This is the struggle for our right to dream during these times of polycrisis genocidal violence, and mass suffering. It is a struggle to hope and to act and to take up the urgent question of what it means to build a just world in which the humanity of everyone is protected and honored. Tonight's discussion topic will center on a struggle for imagination, a struggle that has been made especially urgent today. It is a topic that is crucial to being human and to living humanly with one another and the planet on which our survival depends. Tonight's discussion is therefore fundamental, not only to how we understand and engage with freedom, but how we practice freedom and what it means to live in the world that facilitates and encourages the freedom to be, the freedom to live, and the freedom to love. This is among the most fundamental tasks of our time. But it has also been a task that those before us has undertaken. We might think of the struggle to imagine as trans-historical, a task that is of our time, but also always beyond it. To engage with this topic in the open and collective manner that we plan to do this evening is part of honoring the legacies of Joe Moabi and Abdullah Omar. I am hoping that the interactive component of this evening's lecture will infuse it with a necessary kind of dynamism. Dynamic engagements of the sort are appropriate to the agency of the topic being addressed. As Dr. Ismail has already noted, Dr. Thandi Gamedze's lecture will lead us in this discussion. And after that, Ms. Thandi Gamedze, who is a lecturer in the Department of Political Science, the College of Human Sciences, will offer a response. The floor will then be open to everyone in the audience for further engagement. I'm hoping that this will be suitably lively and it will generate discussion because we are here for justice and for freedom and for imagination. I want to once again welcome our guest, tonight's keynote speaker, Thandi Gamedze, and our respondents, Thandi Gamedze, the Omar and the Moabi families, as well as the Institute for Social and Health Sciences, Pan-African Psychology Union, and Psychological Society of South Africa. The lecture promises to be as enriching, as generative as it's urgent and necessary. Before I step off, I want us to recognize Professor Sidat Mohammed. Prof. Sidat, may you be seen, colleagues. Prof. Sidat. Yes, colleagues, Prof. Sidat is the founder of ISHS, so need to be recognized. I thank you all. You are all welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Nkosi, for your warm and insightful words and for grounding this event within the large vision of the College of Human Sciences. Before we proceed to hear the tributes from the Umar and Moabi families, let us take a moment to celebrate the lives of the late Minister Abdullah Umar and Mr. Joe Moabi. I'm sure the video has stirred fond memories of these stalwarts. And so, as we just breathe and take in the video, we're going to be handing over now to the messages from the Muwabi and Umar family. The first message is from Mrs. Latifa Umar, and she will share the message from the Umar family this year. Mrs. Latifa Umar is the sister of the late Dalla Umar, and she holds a significant place within her family as the second youngest of the Umar siblings. A retired librarian, she has also dedicated much of her life to community activism, particularly in the residence and civic sector. So we're now going to play a short clip with the message from Mrs. Latifa Umar.
Memories of Dalla Umar. Dalla appeared to most people as a calm and composed man. But behind the facade were a brilliant intellect and a gift for oratory. He had an immense love for his country and its people. And for him, the principles of non-racialism, democracy and human rights were of paramount importance, and for him would always be in the forefront whenever there was any discussions or decisions to be taken. He came from a large family. Our father, Mohammed, died in his 60s, leaving his widow Aisha to fend for and raise our family. Our older brothers and sisters and their spouses helped her to do so, thereby making great personal sacrifices, such as having to leave school while still in primary school and to go and work to bring in some money to keep the family. Dalla never forgot the role that his beloved mother and his older siblings played in his education and finally in his graduation as a lawyer. He always visited them whenever he could, sitting and chatting and catching up with them and often asking for advice and their opinions. He was a loving and supportive husband to Farida and father to his children, Kimal Rastam and Fazlan, and a grandfather to, at that stage, the two grandsons, Ramiz and Wasim. To the rest of the family, he was a role model and an approachable brother and uncle and cousin who always had time for them and always had time to crack jokes and entertain them. As a lawyer and advocate, his hard work, his brilliant mind, and his gifted speech resulted in many successes, and as we know, led to him being appointed as the Minister of Justice in the first democratic government under Nelson Mandela. He, in this capacity, he amalgamated the different judicial systems of the apartheid period into one national judicial system. One of his famous achievements was formulating the legislation which saw the establishment of the TRC, and in his political career, there were highlights in his role in constitution making, the constitution making process, the formation and leadership in the UDF, and the formation of NADAL, the National Association of Democratic Lawyers, amongst others. Once the ANC was unbanned, he played a pivotal role in the organization. He made lifelong friends and fans also with many of the people he met during his time as either an advocate or as the Minister of Justice and later Transport. Some of them are now also deceased. There is Johnny Aronson, a trade unionist of Samoa, former trade unionist of Samoa, now deceased, and also deceased Judge Pius Langa, a constitutional judge. And another Johnny who is still alive today, Johnny De Lange, with whom he spent very many social and serious hours of serious discussion. His untimely death in 2004 in his 60s robbed South Africa of a patriot, a leader, and one who would still have had much to give South Africa and Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Latifa, for your heartfelt words and for reminding us of the remarkable legacy of the late Minister Abdullah Umar. Next, I would like to introduce the Moabi representatives. So first of all, there's going to be a creative piece that will be played, and this was done by Sean and Sekane, children of Khotso Moabi, and Inti and Chepo, children of Gibson Moabi. And these are the grandchildren of the late Mr. Joe Moabi.
Joe Moabi, a name so bold, a father, a husband, a story told. Strict, yet laughter he freely gave. A South African hero, strong and brave.
In the fight for freedom, he stood tall. For justice and truth, he gave his all. Honesty his shield, integrity his guide. Even when it cost him, he never lied.
He cherished his children, his family near. With grandkids' smiles, he held them dear. Through every storm, through every test, he lived his truth, he gave his best.
Respected by foes, by political kin, in hard discussions, he'd always win. Never withdrawing from a heated debate, his voice was firm, his stance was great.
They called him Ipati Ainamali with cheer, for his financial prudence was always clear. A man who handled wealth with care, he made sure all was just and fair.
But more than wealth or victory's song, his love for Africa was deep and strong. For every child, for every land, he fought with heart and steady hand.
A man of strength,
of courage, of light.
Joe
Joe
Moabi,
Moabi, forever in our sight.
Thank you.
Is this on? Evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Khotso. I'm the baby of the family. Joe's youngest son. Good evening once again. I'm just going to just say all protocol observed. I'm not going to follow all the protocol. You forgive me. I must say, when I actually saw the theme of the conference, I actually said to myself, I must attend this conference because this is straight up my father's alley, and I really want to hear what the discussion is. I just thought of the title, Imagination, Battle, Struggles for Liberation, and Struggles of the Imagination. I thought, wow, what a mind-blowing title. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of the discussions and the statements that were, some of the discussions this evening. And I was also reflecting, it's 19 years when we've been having these lectures, and I'm seeing some familiar faces. And I remember some of the lectures and the fun that we've had, and with the Omar family as well. Good evening again. Um, I'm here today with my sister, Nana, my elder sister, the boss of the family still. She's the one that whips me and my brother into shape when we're being naughty, even now. Um, so, I was actually reflecting a while back in terms of who my dad was, and I just really realized that, fathering is an honor. And my dad, after somebody passes away, you start to reflect on things. And my dad really, he was an exemplary father. Yes, we all have our faults and issues that we all carry, but he was able to carry us through from a distance. We were in the UK at a distance, and he was on the African continent. He was either at the United Nations or in Zimbabwe or in the bush. But if it wasn't for my dad, I would have grown up in the UK. I'm not scared to say probably I would have ended up a gangster on the streets of London. That was a biggest risk. We grew up in an estate which was like third on the riot list. So the environment and that we grew up in, there was a very real risk of that. And his presence kept us away from all of that. We always used to read, go to school, read. That always remained in the back of our heads as children. But I look at this title and I ask myself, Dula Omar and my dad, they fought for democracy, and this lecture helps us remember them and their fight for democracy. I also looked through some of the promotional material that was sent to us, and the series, it indicates, aims to deepen our understanding of freedom and prepare us for meaningful to implement the ideals of democracy. So I was saying to myself then, it continued to say its purpose is to help us remember that we are free, and how do we want that freedom to be. But I keep asking myself, are we free? As South Africans, are we free? What is freedom these days? And because of my dad and the likes of Dula Omar, I'm asking myself, are we free? I'm seriously asking myself, in the current dispensation, I'm asking myself, are we free? Really free? And I was reflecting that after coming home, I came back in 96, and I thought I'd never ask myself, are we free? But these days, I'm finding myself asking that question more and more. And what does freedom look like? And what does it look like to you guys? Everybody here. What does it look like to you? Does it look like what my dad and Dula Alma would have wished and hoped for? I imagine the country where my daughter can walk down the road and not be harassed by guys. I imagined a place where she can walk and think freely while she's being educated and not regurgitating textbooks of our European domination. I also imagined where her mixed race heritage will not be questioned as not being African. And I also asked, when I was looking at this, I said to myself, where do I draw inspiration from regarding this title and this subject matter? And I actually went to the Bible and I read Galatians verse 5:1. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. Do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. I feel like we're in a country that is starting to submit again to the yoke of slavery. And the worst thing is that this slavery is being committed by our own people. Are we free when many of us continue to sit and watch as our country degenerates into a pit of corruption? I also want to say and ask the question, are we free when many of us are beholden to those puppet masters that hold our salaries in their hands? Are we free when people's incomes and salaries are used as bargaining chips to do what the puppet master wants us to do and say? And again, I reflected even further, and I went to the dictionary and I assessed what the word freedom is. And it defines it as the power or the right to act and speak or think as one wants. The other description is the state of not being imprisoned or enslaved, the state of not being subject to or affected by something undesirable. Then I asked myself, would Joe Moabi accept that a man can be shot and killed at a university? If many of you don't know that I work at the University of Fort Hare, and recently we had 2 shootings, and it shook us as staff and as students. And I asked my dad, what would my dad think of this? He worked at UNISA. What would he think of this? Is this what he fought for? So how can we be free when these things continue to be perpetrated in South Africa? I ask myself, are we free in a country that wants to restrict religious freedoms in our schools? Are we free when we continue to face the scourge of GBV? Are we free when my sister must go and wait for hours to receive her medication? So I'm asking you, ladies and gentlemen, tonight, are we free? And is this the freedom that Dula Omar and Joe Moabi have sacrificed so much for? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khotso Moabi. I think we should have put you down as one of the keynote speakers tonight. I'd like to thank also the grandchildren. I think we're commemorating the grandfather. He would be very proud of them all. So I now start or hand over to our keynote speaker. It's my privilege to introduce this year's keynote speaker, and I think we've mentioned him already in the beginning of the proceedings, Dr. Thandi Gamedze. She's an academic, a facilitator, a cultural worker, a writer, a poet, an educator, and a theologian. Many hats. Her doctoral research, undertaken at the University of Johannesburg Center for Education Rights and Transformation, was transdisciplinary, bringing together the worlds of education and theology to better understand the role that churches play in both upholding and challenging dominant power relations relating to race, gender, and class. Dr. Gamedze has broad experience working across multiple sites, including churches, universities, and community organizations. She also works with Bottom Up, a non-governmental organization which works with high school students in developing critical consciousness towards enacting change in their schools as well as their communities. She has a background in physiotherapy and has worked as a researcher and associate lecturer at the University of the Western Cape. She has also lectured at the University of Cape Town School of Education and Department of Sociology, as well as worked for a number of years at the Warehouse Trust, an organization which supports challenges and journeys alongside churches towards addressing injustice in their context. She's currently based at UWC's Desmond Tutu Center for Religion and Social Justice as a postdoctoral research fellow. I now hand over to Dr. Gamedze for what I think promises to be an inspiring keynote.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction. I can't see the slide, so I'll just indicate when to change. Thank you. But yes, once again, good evening, everyone. It's really such an honor to be here as we collectively celebrate and remember the lives and the important contributions of Minister Dalla Omar and Mr. Joe Moabi, as well as the broader movements, ideas, and radical imaginations that they stood for and dedicated their lives to. I spend a lot of time thinking about the role that imagination plays, both in creating and sustaining the world that we currently inhabit, as well as creating and sustaining the world that we're hoping to build. And this is what I'll be talking about tonight. And so this is why I titled this talk, The Imagination Battle, Struggles for Liberation as Struggles of Imagination. And change to the next slide. One of my favorite quotes, and one that has maybe provoked my thinking the most, is from Adrienne Marie Brown, and she says, "We are in an imagination battle. I often feel I am trapped inside someone else's imagination, and I must engage my own imagination in order to break free." I think that this quote does a few important things. Firstly, it recognizes that imagination is not confined to the realm of the mind, but has very real material implications. Often we associate the idea of imagination with child's play and dismiss it as unimportant. But the world that we currently inhabit, with all of its systems and structures, was first imagined by people and was subsequently formed and shaped and created in alignment with this imagination. Secondly, the quote recognizes that the realm of imagination is a contested one. Adrienne Marie Brown, in the quote, names this idea of someone else's imagination in which she feels as though she's trapped, and she names that she must engage her own imagination in order to challenge and break free from this established imagination. In this, there's a recognition that there are always antagonistic imaginations at war with each other, in competition to determine what the world should look like. Thirdly, the quote highlights our power and agency in this realm of imagination and world making. The recognition that the world that we currently inhabit was imagined and created makes it clear that there's nothing inevitable about it, and introduces the possibility that a different world can be imagined and created. Mitri Raheb, thank you. Mitri Raheb, the brilliant Palestinian liberation theologian, says that we lose the future the moment we lose our capacity for imagination. And conversely then, finding and nurturing our capacity for imagination makes possible a pathway to an alternate future. Finally, I think the imagery of being trapped in this dominant imagination is useful because it shows that it's something that has been imposed on us without our permission. This dominant imagination is something that we've been born into, that we've grown up in, that we've been socialized into in a whole range of ways. I think this concept is well captured in a quote by Steve Biko, where he describes the particularities of the imagination trap in which he had been caught. He says, "Born shortly before 1948, I have lived all my conscious life in the framework of institutionalized separate development. My friendships, my love, my education, my thinking, and every other facet of my life have been carved and shaped within the context of separate development. Just as being physically trapped confines one's movement, the imagination trap confines our relationships, our dreams, and our thinking, and inscribes limits on what is possible and what is not. In line with this, in stating that well-known quote, "The most potent weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed," Biko was clear about the role of the mind in the process of liberation. He was clear that what we are able to conceive of in the realm of the mind has direct impact on what is possible in the realm of the material. In this way, a key aspect of the struggle for liberation of all kinds and across all sites and geographies is a struggle of the imagination, a battle between what I will be referring to as the colonial imagination and the prophetic imagination. It is an imagination battle between the colonial world that has been imagined for us with all of its dynamics of dehumanization, inequality, exploitation, and destruction of our ways of being and our ways of relating to one another and the earth, and the world that we dream of, alongside all those who have dreamed before us, including our collective ancestors, Dalo Omar and Joe Moabi, who we commemorate here. Next slide. So this image that's on the slide is one that I've adapted from a resource called Manna and Mercy, and please forgive my art. It might not be the best masterpiece, but it attempts to broadly depict the social power dynamics that are present in society in this image of a pyramid. So it shows a deeply unequal society. At the base of the pyramid are those who are most oppressed and marginalized, and at the top of which are those who hold the most power, whether that's political, economic, or social. And while the specifics of what this looked like might vary across contexts, for the most part, this is broadly how our world is structured under the neoliberal capitalism that we're all embroiled in. And what's important is this image notes two key ways in which these highly unjust realities are upheld. So firstly, what's represented on the left is what I'm referring to as the ideological status quo apparatus, building from the work of Louis Althusser, who talked about the ideological state apparatus. So this is really all of the ideological mechanisms, culture, narratives, ideas, theologies, which support this colonial status quo and make any alternative seem unimaginable. So this apparatus functions to provide the ideological legitimation, justification, and even sacralization for this unjust status quo, with the messaging, this is the way it is. And often God, you can see that hand from above, often God is also appropriated in service of this status quo with claims that this reality is God ordained. We can think here of the way that the idea that Israelis are God's chosen people is deployed to maintain and win ideological support for Israel's apartheid and settler colonialism. Or closer to home, we can think of the way that the idea that the Afrikaans people were God's chosen people was deployed to uphold and legitimize apartheid in South Africa. So this ideological status quo apparatus on the left is akin to what Mitri Rahib refers to as the software which justifies, legitimizes, and sustains the hardware of empire. The mechanism on the left could also be broadly understood as the colonial imagination, or what theologian Walter Brueggemann refers to as the dominant consciousness. Essentially, it represents the imagination or consciousness out of which this unequal and unjust reality has been birthed and through which it is sustained. So if this is how the colonial imagination functions, it's also important to dig into the specifics of what it entails. What are the stories, ideas, narratives that it deploys to do this legitimizing work? And this manifests differently across contexts, but general central ideas relate to the justification of hierarchies. So we can think about an idea like meritocracy, which makes the claim that those at the top of the pyramid are there because they worked hard for it, and those at the bottom are just lazy. We can think of ideas which legitimate domination through beliefs about superiority and inferiority, whether that relates to gender or race or class or sexuality or anything else. Ideas around how we see success in society, that success is a zero-sum game and that some need to be exploited for other people's gain. Ideas that some groups are exploitable or even disposable. Ideas which justify and even sacralize the fight to always get further up the pyramid no matter what it takes. And this colonial imagination is nothing new. The biblical prophets expose the particularities of it in their context, painting a picture that feels eerily similar to some of the realities that we see today. The prophet Habakkuk exposes this reality in which the powerful, quote, sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own, unquote. A picture of those, quote, as greedy as the grave who like death are never satisfied, unquote. A picture of those, quote, who build cities with bloodshed and establish towns upon injustice. And an imagination which sustains all of this violence and greed and exploitation. Then on the right in the image, you can see what I'm referring to also in adapted Althusserian terms as the repressive status quo apparatus. So this encompasses the military, the police, as well as other institutions and bodies whose function is to uphold this pyramid, this system, through status quo sanctioned violence and repression, ensuring that not only is this the way that it is, but this is the way that it always will be. So this repressive status quo apparatus generally comes into play when, for whatever reason, there is a failure of the software on the left, and so the status quo begins to be resisted. Next slide, please. So importantly, that image that we just saw, it only portrays this unjust reality and the mechanisms that keep it in place. In this image, I've tried to make visible this imagination battle, this idea of the prophetic imagination. So while the colonial imagination is generally the dominant one or hegemonic, there are always glimpses of something different, however marginal. And according to Walter Brueggemann, the nurturing of this something different is central to the task of what he refers to as prophetic ministry. So he describes this task as follows: as to nurture, nourish, and evoke a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. The task of prophetic ministry, then, is to bring into being an imagination that disrupts or pokes holes in or brings into question the colonial imagination. It poses a challenge to the status quo by showing that there is, in fact, another way and giving us glimpses of this. This prophetic imagination is also captured well by the biblical prophets. The prophet Micah paints this as an imagination for a world where military might is no longer necessary. And this famous quote, where swords are hammered into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. He talks about a world where nation will no longer fight against nation nor train for war anymore. An imagination for a reality where success is not a zero-sum game, and there is, in fact, enough for everybody to flourish. An imagination where, quote, everyone will live in peace and prosperity, enjoying their own grapevines and fig trees. It's an imagination which, counter to the colonial imagination, which thrives off of fear, everyone is safe, and there will no longer be anything to fear. It's important to note that there's great resistance to this prophetic imagination, which poses a significant threat to the status quo. And this resistance comes from within. Walter Brueggemann notes that we are also children of the royal consciousness, or the colonial imagination. And thus, all of us, in one way or another, have deep commitments to it. And of course, the resistance comes from outside, most significantly from those who are benefiting from this status quo. However, despite possible repression, Brueggemann insists that it is the vocation of the prophet to keep alive the ministry of imagination, to keep on conjuring and proposing alternate futures to the single one that the king or the empire wants to urge as the only thinkable one. In Mitri Rahib's words, we have to learn how to think what now seems to be unthinkable. Next slide, please. A key part of the imagination battle is the naming and exposing of the colonial imagination that is birthing the world in which we live, breathe, and have our being. Until we recognize this imagination for what it is, we have no basis from which to imagine something different. And this isn't an easy task because a key part of what the colonial imagination does is to position itself as the only possible imagination, the only thinkable imagination. We can't always see it because we're in it. And therefore, recognizing and making this imagination visible, what could be thought of as social analysis or reading the signs of the times, is essential to the birthing of the alternative. The South African Kairos document is a really important example of this work of reading the signs of the times and represents a key aspect of the story of the church within the liberation struggle in South Africa. The document was written in 1985 into a very tumultuous and repressive period, a period of great repression and violence from the apartheid government against all forms of popular resistance. And the document was written as a challenge to a church that the authors believed was failing to respond and act adequately in the face of this repression. The document analyzes and makes visible the theologies that formed part of the ideological status quo apparatus, and the theologies that were working to sustain, justify, and legitimate the apartheid state, both covertly and overtly. The document then paints a picture of a prophetic theology or a prophetic imagination, and it emphasizes that such a theology or imagination first requires that deep and robust social analysis, which involves careful and collective analysis of the various intersectional power dynamics that operate in society to privilege some and to oppress others. So such an analysis provides us with an accurate understanding of the colonial imagination and the mechanisms through which it operates to produce material realities, and thus gives us that platform from which to imagine an alternative. And this is particularly important because of the empire's tendency and ability to reconfigure itself. I'm really captivated by Alan Busak's imagery of the pharaohs on both sides of the blood-red waters, imagery which recognizes that the traces of empire show up both where we expect to see them as well as where we don't. It recognizes that the reality is never quite as binary as we sometimes imagine, but that the oppressive mechanisms upon which the empire is founded show up in all of us in different ways. Social analysis allows us to become proficient in recognizing the empire whenever and however it shows up, hopefully even when it shows up within us. Next slide, please. In light of all this, at least an aspect of the role of those who wish to be part of building a different world, one that is characterized by peace and social justice and equality, has to be of both exposing and critiquing the colonial imagination, and then creating, nurturing, and pointing to an alternate imagination. Part of our work has to be in building popular recognition that another world is possible, and that we do not have to give in to what feels like the inevitability of the colonial imagination. And what is important to recognize is that we are by no means starting from scratch. All liberation struggles have also been struggles of imagination. And that's why I wanted to put this slide here with this incredible artwork. It felt very fitting for tonight. But all of these liberation struggles have done the work of prophetic ministry, as Walter Brueggemann refers to it, both of exposing and critiquing the colonial imagination, as well as providing glimpses of a world that could be. These imagination battles are waged in numerous ways and from all kinds of sites. And I want to make visible some of them here by pulling out different examples, and I'll be putting them in conversation with some of my poetry. So the next slide is of the Black Christ. So this is a painting painted by artist Ronald Harrison in 1962. So there's a picture of the painting as well as the wall that I think was in progress at the time in Salt River as well. So this artwork provided a creative and sharp critique of the apartheid state, using their own framework, Christianity, as the site for the imagination battle. So each character in the painting bears a likeness to and represents a person who was active on the South African political scene at the time. So Christ on the cross is depicted as struggle activist Albert Luthuli, while the Roman soldiers doing the work of crucifying Christ resemble apartheid architect Hendrik Verwoerd and former Minister of Justice John Vorster. This painting, in the tradition of Black theology, which would only really be developed a few years later, challenged the colonial imagination in which God was understood to sanction and support the apartheid state, and laid out in very clear terms an imagination in which not only was God on the side of the oppressed, but that God was the oppressed. That under the apartheid regime, God was actually being crucified, and thus painting the struggle for liberation as sacred work that God is supportive of and involved in. This poem that I'm going to share, God is Getting Tired, attempts to do similar work, thinking about the current context of the genocide in Gaza. God is getting tired. It's clear that God is getting tired. They worked so hard to keep that child alive under the rubble for 6 days until she was rescued. But then they couldn't save her from that 2,000-pound bomb. It's clear that God is getting tired. They spent so much energy keeping a mother and her twins healthy through an entire pregnancy and birth amidst a genocide. But as they took a breath thinking that the hard work was over, all three were killed in an airstrike. It's clear that God is getting tired. They worked around the clock, keeping a man who had lost 3 limbs alive, and it seemed that he was out of the woods when the hospital was bombed and the building collapsed on top of him. It's clear that God is getting tired. The prayers are not even reaching them anymore. There's just so many that they've simply given up. Like when you reach a certain level in Tetris and the blocks start coming so fast, and for a time you frantically move around the pieces in an attempt to maintain a semblance of control, until at some point you just put your hands up in defeat, recognizing that the end is inevitable and there is nothing more that you can do. It's clear that God is getting tired, that God is tired, that God has been tired for 10 horrifying months. For 76 horrifying years, God is tired and defeated, and they've decided that it's time to vacate their home in the sky and move down to a tent in Gaza. God is there now, ready to die alongside their people in Israel's next airstrike. Can move to the next slide, please. The next example of the prophetic ministry that has taken shape in our midst is the example of the Rhodes Must Fall movement, which the image depicts. In questioning and critiquing the presence of the statue of Cecil John Rhodes on the UCT campus, the movement exposed the very present colonial imagination, which was alive and well, is alive and well. This imagination, signified by the statue, but certainly not limited to it, celebrated, legitimized, and even glorified South Africa's history of colonization, through which land was stolen from indigenous people, through which slavery was justified, through which white supremacy was concretized, through which racial capitalism was introduced and entrenched, and through which Black people were rendered exploitable and disposable. The student movement exposed this imagination, which had in certain ways been invisibilized and taken for granted under a "this is the way it is" mentality. And the movement fueled an imagination for a decolonized campus, decolonized education, decolonized ways of being in relationship to one another, and ultimately a decolonized South Africa, an imagination for Azania. I wrote the following poem, The Statue's Lament, in response to another colonial statue, on the next slide, that of Louis Botha outside of Parliament. And it's from the perspective of the horse. I can tell that the horse is unhappy, face downcast in shame, unable to meet the eyes of onlookers, front leg raised in a half-hearted attempt to escape. Half-hearted because she is aware that the cement is strong and the white supremacy is stronger. And so she resigns herself to the role that she has been cast, an unwilling accomplice in this story of domination. But even in her resignation, she dreams of a different day, where her vocal cords are released from their concrete prison, and, lament liberated, her blood-curdling wails will tear through the sky, equal in frequency to all the pain that she has been forced to bear witness to. She dreams of a day where her legs are unshackled and she can run, shedding the pedestal upon which she and her rider had been placed to perpetuate the hierarchies and communicate clearly whose lives matter and whose do not. And finally free, she would gallop at breathtaking speed until she reached the edge of a cliff. And after pausing a moment to take in the miracle beauty of mountain meeting ocean meeting city, she would close her eyes and jump. And the rock of which she was fashioned would collide with the rock of the cliff in a violently beautiful rock family reunion, and she would be dashed to pieces, her sacrifice perhaps becoming the foundation for something different. And her jump would of course mean the end for her rider too. Forced to his knees, he would tumble into the ocean's embrace, begging its waves to wash the blood from his hands, as, finally confronted with himself, he would crumble under the weight of his iniquities. The following slide And the next example of prophetic ministry and imagination that I want to highlight is that of Sissy Gool House, the Reclaim the City occupation of the old Woodstock Hospital in Cape Town. Since 2017, the site has become home to close to 900 people who have faced various struggles in their housing situations, from having been evicted due to gentrification to just being unable to afford secure housing. In a city like Cape Town, which is governed often by an imagination where the thing that makes a person deserving of safe housing close to the city is their access to money, Sissy Gool House represents a prophetic imagination where all people are deserving of peace, safety, human rights, and home. I wrote this next poem of home and wholeness in similar fashion against some of the dehumanizing and hostile realities of our city, which particular groups of people are subjected to. Of home and wholeness. Hostile city built on stolen land with stolen hands. How dare you label attempts to create sanctuary as illegal? Homemaking is revolutionary in the system born of displacement. Wholeness is revolutionary in the system invested in dislocation. Keep fighting to make home. Keep fighting to be whole. It doesn't seem possible, but perhaps a day will come when home and wholeness are no longer forcibly removed. A day where they shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat of their fruit, that reality of which the prophet Isaiah long since dreamed. But in the meantime, do not forget, your very breath is resistance. Your very presence is protest. In this world telling you your life does not matter, the defiant drumbeat of your heart is bravery. Your very being is courageous. So whatever they say, breathe the air like it was yours. Take up space like it was 1651. If you have the strength, go on and build. And if, when they have done their worst, you still have strength, if you still have breath, build again. Thank you. Thank you. The next slide is an artwork that I came across in a recent walk around Salt River. This piece represents a challenge to the colonial imagination, which inscribes certain identities and hierarchies based on this idea of nationality. This is an imagination which sacralizes borders and presents them as if they were natural and God-ordained, and as if they play a role in determining a person's worth and claim to belonging. This piece represents a challenge to the Afrophobia that is so rife in South Africa, fueled by hateful discourse and rhetoric that comes at us from all levels. It offers an alternate imagination, a prophetic imagination, a Pan-Africanist vision of an Africa that is truly home to all Africans. I wrote the following poem, Walls and Borders, as a challenge to the same Afrophobic imagination that the artwork was addressing. We should be suspicious of thick walls, like the ones we see at the castle. If you're anticipating the need for that much protection, you must be doing something super shady. We should be suspicious of huge military budgets, like who are you afraid of? And what have you been up to that you are convinced that it's necessary to spend all that money to protect yourself from transnational rage? We should be suspicious of high walls, electric fences, and armed private security. We should be connecting it all to histories of indefensible theft, murder, and bloodshed. The walls recognize that something's not right. Why would they need to be there otherwise? We should be suspicious of all borders drawn around us without our permission, etching onto us constructed identities. We must reject the narrative that they inspire, refuse the violence that they give birth to. Because Africa was not born with borders, but carved up like a meal ready to be eaten by greedy Europeans. We should be suspicious because they are still feasting, their gluttony removed from our visibility, while we make meals of one another. Thank you. The next slide, this final example that I'm going to share about, centers another piece of Salt River's street art. This piece has a very interesting and contested story and has been a site of struggle in itself, but this version that you see is a reclaimed version by Salt River residents. In its declaration from Salt River to the sea, it draws on and connects the community of Salt River to the decolonial Palestinian freedom cry, from the river to the sea. It brings a struggle far away in terms of distance, close to home, challenging the colonial imagination that seeks to divide and conquer, putting the oppressed in competition with one another in order to maintain power. This artistic intervention refuses this separateness and instead nurtures an imagination of solidarity in which our struggles become each other's, allowing us to see ourselves as being part of a shared and collective project of mutual liberation and humanization. In the following poem, Rubble Everywhere, which I wrote in response to the tragic George building collapse, I attempted to capture this imagination of shared struggle and shared liberation. Rubble everywhere. I don't know that it's okay to compare cross-contextual stories of those trapped under rubble, because each is so unique in its particular horror. Day laborers in George crushed to death building an apartment block that at wages of 80 rand a day they'd never have been able to afford to live in. And Palestinians in Gaza who for over 200 days have been intentionally massacred in their homes by indiscriminately dropped US-funded Israeli bombs. I don't know that these realities can or should be compared, but I think we would be remiss in failing to recognize the shared stories of unthinkable injustice, the colonial powers that transcend all kinds of borders, succeeding in making certain lives expendable, buryable under rubble, disappearable. Through systems of racial capitalism, imperialism, and domination, systems which are constructed upon inhumane and deadly working conditions for Black South Africans, and apartheid and genocide for Palestinians. And while there are clear differences necessary to note, what is perhaps important is that shared stories of injustice necessitate shared struggles for liberation. And thus, we must live taking seriously Madiba's injunction that none of us are free until Palestine is. And we must make sure, too, that we recognize the unfreedom present in our own backyard, so that when freedom finally comes for Palestine, which we know that it will not be compromised by that which we have left undone. Thank you. And the final slide. So each of these examples of prophetic ministry do what Mitri Rahib invites us to in saying that we must live with our feet firmly grounded in the reality of this world with its empires, yet at the same time be engaged in creating with our own hands a foretaste of the kingdom to come. Each of these examples recognizes that at least part of the struggle for liberation of all kinds is a struggle of imaginations. Each of these examples engages powerfully in the imagination battle, challenging the colonial imagination by exposing it and posing an alternative. I end with a poem called That Day, which seeks to ground itself in this tension between where we are and where we want to be. And I hope that it provides us all with courage and hope as we continue our work towards the different world that we hold in our hearts. That day. We fight not for the sake of fighting, but for that day when fighting is no longer required because the darkness has finally been swallowed up by light. In that day, our fighting shall turn to dancing as we twirl to songs of celebration. Our attention will shift from destruction to creation because all that had needed to fall will have fallen. And perhaps on day one, we will wake up confused, unsure of who we are outside of the calling to loosen the chains of injustice. But on that day, there will be an abundance of grace and space for us to find our feet, time no longer a slave driver, but a gift. On that day, we will learn to find ourselves and each other outside of a world woven of suffering. We will learn to make art, jokes, and conversation that depend not on pain. We will learn to create beauty from beauty. And while that day will not be tomorrow, nor even perhaps the tomorrow of many years to come, at least part of our work must be to train our eyes to see it. For if we can just glimpse it, our fight is not futile, but the gateway under construction between this world and that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gamedze, for your thoughtful and provoking and evocative address. I think I'm going to keep my reflections for a little later because otherwise I'd be ending up being the respondent and not Ms. Thandi Gamedze. So as Prof has indicated earlier, Prof Nkosi, that Ms. Hadebe is a lecturer at the University of South Africa in the Department of Political Science. She holds a master's degree, nearly a doctoral, from Rhodes University in International Relations. Her interests includes Azanian liberation, historiographies, memory and resistance, anti-black racism, and Afrikaner womanism. Her specializations include political theory, political philosophy, Pan-African black consciousness, philosophy, and decoloniality.
We are always in between spaces. But this one has given up. Protocol. How much time do I have? 20 minutes. Am I audible? This mic this morning. So firstly, a word of gratitude to Madam Dean, Prof. Nkosi, and Prof. Meyiwa in absentia. Thank you for your struggles in supporting us, these spaces in the university. And to my esteemed colleagues and comrades under the leadership of Professor Sufla, thank you for the opportunity to come here so that we can learn and relearn from each other. Dr. Thandi Gamedze, thank you for being a sister, for being a comrade, and for sharing your notes, rough as they were, with us beforehand. I think that gesture is really appreciated because one has gotten tired of always speaking on their feet on such serious topics. And therefore, I appreciated the time to sit in these ideas and be provoked by them and be unsettled by them. We gather here to honor two stalwarts, one from the Congress movement, the other from the Pan-Africanist movement. And their commemoration this year coincides with our 30-year anniversary of majority rule, which was ushered in 1994 through elections, and it is marked by the advent of the GNU and its revelations. I mention this because South Africa has not gotten into the tradition of remembering stalwarts from the ANC and stalwarts from the Pan-Africanist Congress. And so it is quite curious for me that we find ourselves in this moment and in a political landscape, especially since the land remains in the hands of the dispossessors, one may need to ask the question, what would Dr. Dala Ama and Tate Joe Mabi say about the GNU, if anything? The prophetic imagination is where I want to begin this response. I think mostly I want to thank you for your poetic imagination, and all of your poems sat beautifully inside me, yet not without making me ask some very difficult questions. When you speak about God, reminding us that he's probably tired now, questions that revisited my mind were questions that were not too unfamiliar to those in the Middle Passage, many of whom asked, where was God during slavery? We continue to ask, and you remind us, where was God in Namibia? Where was God in Haiti and Sudan? Where is God in the Congo? Indeed, the imagination battle continues. The decolonial movement and scholarship demand that we call and name things the way they are, so that we may fully understand them. This call to clarity emphasizes the importance to accurately identifying and articulating the realities we face, particularly within the context of colonial legacies. And it is in confronting these truths that we better engage in critical discourse and challenge the dominant narratives and liberate our ways of being. This is because understanding the mechanisms of oppression and the condition it generates requires that we find new ways of analysis and new ways of being together in struggle. This is a struggle against colonial ideas, as you have reminded us, and the struggle against the paradigm of war, as Professor Maldonado Torres reminds us. Therefore, in naming and shaming the colonial imagination and its manifestations, as you have challenged us to do, one can think of a few examples from the recent history that encapsulates the imagination battle in occupied Azania. Each an attempt at a humanizing response from the colonized, to which the colonizer responded with unthinkable violence, as he has always done. We are called to remember Sharpeville in 1960, which was a watershed moment. The children of Soweto in June 16, children who the Black consciousness movement had inspired to speak against the colonial imagination. Recently in 2012, we remember the Marikana massacre. The miners exposing neoliberal capitalist greed in the hands of Black hands. We also remember, not so recently, the Fees and the Rose Must Fall movement in 2015, the Colonial University, and the Black epistemic violence that continued. So Bugwa reminds us always that we are not, or rather should not be afraid of the consequences of our actions. And it is therefore meet that we speak truth before we die. Post-1994 South Africa remains a settler colony, and the most violent one at it, as it has normalized Black death, ensuring that apartheid's project of dehumanization persists by other means. Whether it's township life that is both joyful yet deadly. I mean, you die from eating snacks from a spaza shop down the road. You also die from drowning in a manhole. You die from a school toilet. Biko could have been speaking to the children of Naledi in Soweto when he said that township life makes it a miracle for Black children to make it to adulthood. You might want to ask yourself, how did Biko foresee the Lone Min massacre in Marikana? How did he know about Andres Tatana, who was just a teacher? Could it be that Biko remains buried in the sinkhole in Lily Mine with Priti Gambule, Yvonne Mnisi, and Solomon Nyerende? Whose imagination is it that normalized Black death? 30 years into the constitutional democracy, we might want to ask ourselves. Who continues to uphold the colonial and apartheid structures that sustain the Rainbow Nation's deathbed? Whose imagination is guilty of Black world unmaking in the afterlife of apartheid? When Black children under the age of 5 make up 60% of the total population, but account for 55% of total deaths, whereas their counterparts make up only 11% of the population, only account for 7% of the total death. And we don't speak about the death of children in occupied Tanzania. We will only speak in folk tongues when we speak of the children of Gaza. Let me repeat that. If we don't speak about the death of Black children in occupied Tanzania, we will only speak in folk tongues when it comes to the children of Gaza. If we have not learned how to language our own settler occupation, how do we begin to language meaningful solidarity with occupied Palestine? If our wounds are meaningless to us, our deaths not worth remembering to us, how do we call for the genocide to stop in the Congo, the Sudan, Haiti, and in Palestine? This battle is a battle between the imagination of the settler-colonizer paradigm of death that has led me to deduce that post-1994 South Africa, as many have, is indeed shaped by disturbing continuity of violence that normalizes Black death, reflecting the way apartheid has continued through other means. This system cheapens Black lives by embedding racialized violence into everyday structures, making it invisible yet omnipresent. Yet, in the Black consciousness tradition, as well as other resistant traditions, we are drawn towards the Black radical imagination as a site of Black love and Black rage. Much like the prophetic imagination, the Black radical imagination offers a site of possibility, a site of livability when death becomes a norm for Black people. Robert D.G. Kelly reminds us that freedom dreams aim to transcend the narrow understanding of social movements as a mere targeted campaign. Instead, it emphasizes the collective radical imagination that conjures and sustains visions of freedom, even in the darkest times. In the context of the Black consciousness movement, October 19, 1977 is commemorated as Black Solidarity Day, and we commemorated it a few days ago. It marked an important moment in the triumph, however ephemeral, of Black imagination amidst the persecution of Black thought, Black ideas that challenged the colonial imagination. The Sasso Pipi trial of 1974 to 1976 exemplifies how Black imagination was put on trial. Sasso PPC documents, their poems, their speeches, even their manifestos were evidence in the courtrooms of apartheid. In a country where Black radical ideas remain excluded from mainstream political discourse and in westernized university, we argue that Black consciousness and Black power, such radical imaginations, are still on trial in occupied Tanzania. Therefore, it is still darker times for Black consciousness. Yet, we must endeavor to invest in the work of collective radical imagination, as Robert Kelly reminds us. As I conclude, I also want to go back to a moment that most of us in academia want to push under the carpet, yet it remains stubbornly present within us. I want to go back to 2015 and really pay tribute to the students of 2015 and the class that follows. I want to go back to 2015 when the colonial imagination was challenged by young people, and this in itself marked a battle in temporalities. Many of these young people had just entered university for the first time. Others had been there much longer. This moment is important because we all got to have access to a front row view of a battle of temporalities where the young people were battling the colonial order of the day, often managed by those people who ran the universities, some of whom look like them. The students of 2015 and 2016, refusing to be trapped in someone else's imagination, wielded a combative imagination, continuing the tradition of freedom when faced with distress and in institutions that were supposed to nurture their imagination and creativity, let alone their human spirit. They invoke a prophetic imagination in this moment, rejecting the possessor's culture and the settler conquest imagination. The follies called upon the spirit of Diosoka, who in the liminality of missionary conquest and indigenous refusal penned what became known as the Pan-Africanist National Anthem, or Mungu Ibariki Africa in Tanzania, or Ishe Womberera I Africa in Zimbabwe. Zambia too, the national anthem was sang. But in 2015, in Braamfontein, the Azanian imagination, rooted in Black consciousness and Pan-Africanist thought action, was rekindled. Students began to realize that while 1994 claimed to have put an end to racism apartheid, the project of dehumanization in every corner of the miracle democracy and what Fanon had termed pseudo-independence continued. In the South African miracle transition from apartheid to democracy, Fanon adds that within such a racist colonial ideology and culture, the Black person is not a human being. Indeed, Cecil John Rose himself loomed large in the university campuses. He was at home in the lecture halls, in our textbooks, and in curricula, and continues to this day to dominate the imagination inside university council chambers. The students' combative imagination invoked the Azanian prophetic spirit when they decolonized the South African national anthem, defiantly singing, Nkosi Sikelela. A combative imagination was born through song in the picket line. A student led the nation in a decolonized version of a national anthem, reclaiming its revolutionary essence. This anthem, once envisioned to liberate, had been reduced to a mere symbol of the imaginary of the Rainbow Nation, a violent construct stripped from the same legacy of settler conquest. But in that powerful moment of protest in 2015, and in true spirit, its true spirit was reawakening, centering the dispossessed and reminding us of the unfinished business of decolonization. The student had begun to imagine another world beyond the Rainbow Nation. They stood firm in the conviction that, like Arundhati Roy reminds us, another world is possible. She's on a way, on a quiet day. The students, like many of us battling settler colonialism, can hear her breathing. At the center of a decolonized national anthem, a simple yet fundamental question emerges. Whose imagination is at play when we anthem with those whose lives and psychical health are sustained through the violence, Black Death, and genocide? And so the battle continues. aluta, continua. And in this moment, I would like to invite you all to stand so that we sing and reconnect with the revolutionary spirit of the class of 2015. I will lead the decolonial national anthem. You will follow by involving your body. You can clap, but you are not allowed to stand still. Kitso, are you still in the house? Ongezwa? Can you please stand? Nomakuku, I'm counting on you, Knox. All the follists in the house. Kosi, Kosi sigelela, au sigelela, i-Afrika, malupagamisu, lupagamisu, kondolwayo, izwa imitandazo, izwa imitandaza, zo yetu, sibe moya munye, sibe moya munye au noma segunzima, noma segunzima emhlabeni awusihlukunyezwa, sihlukunyezwa kabuhlungu. Nkosi sipha amandla, Nkosi sipha amandla wokunqoba, awusilwe nosathane, silwe nosathane. Everyone can join when you say, "Aw Tulu, Tulu, Lulu, 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 Tulu, Lulu, Lulu, Tulu, Lulu, Lulu, Tulu, Lulu, Lulu, Aw Tulu, Lulu, 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 Tulu, Lulu, 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 Nkosi sipha amandla, Nkosi sipha amandla wokunqoba, awusilwe nosathane, silwe nosathane. Amandla, amandla. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you so much, Ms. Thandi Gamedze, for your response and engaging critically with the ideas presented. I'm sure everyone has found thought-provoking the entire evening, and so now I open the floor for some feedback and comments or questions for Dr. Gamedze.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank all the speakers for giving such beautiful speeches and inspiration, historical perspectives of what you've gone through as a nation. But I think over the years I've observed how our people really articulate the sad status that our people find themselves in. And my question rather will be, when do we really as a nation move beyond this rhetoric? Because not that I have any problem, with conscientizing our people or talking about the suffering that we are facing. But when, to all the speakers, when do we really start moving forward now and go beyond your seminars, memorial lectures, making the real change that is needed in our society. Because everywhere you attend, it's so beautifully put, but at the end of the day, we go back to our enclaves, we enjoy life, we don't really follow up. If we have to look at maybe the children that have died in Soweto out of food poisoning, for instance, probably this will be another discussion in various seminars across the country. But what is it that is done beyond that? When do we go beyond our rhetoric of talking about this? And to me, it somehow reached the point of, we are romanticizing these kind of things. Beautiful poetry and this thing. When do we really go forward and move beyond this rhetoric of talking about the sufferings of our people? Thank you.
Greetings, colleagues. Yeah, the mics seem not to be working. I will depend on my deep voice to do justice. Thank you very much to our presenter and our respondents, Dr. Thandi. My question is really inspired by an art painting that Dr. Thandi shared. I think you said it's by Ronald Harrison of the Black Christ. And I thought to myself, okay.
1 2 1 2. Yeah.
Okay. And I thought to myself, history teaches us that quite often white male patriarchy depicted themselves as saviors, as people who came, who conquered, and in the process saved us. And I thought, is this painting, although with good intentions by Ronald, not flirting with the idea of the colonial imagination, only doing differently by painting this Christ as a black man? And I thought, would it not be part of the prophetic imagination to begin to picture and imagine and think of the many queen mothers who equally sacrificed their lives for the future that we have today? Would it not be a prophetic imagination to think of and paint Christ as a woman? Although, in fact, not although, bearing in mind how many of them gave their lives in many different ways, sacrificing their families and so forth to give to the society that we have today. Is it even conceivable for us to reimagine Christ in a body and in a figure of a woman? And I just wanted to pose that question there, and whether it's permissible within the space of theology to have an imagination where women can be associated with divinity. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know that I'm necessarily the person who should be answering things. I think, we all have our contributions to make to both of these questions, I think. But I'll maybe briefly answer. I mean, I think moving beyond talk is, of course, absolutely essential, and I think all of us are possibly involved in that in different ways. I do think that our imaginations continue to remain trapped in the confines of what people have set out for us. And so I still absolutely believe that that is a key part of the struggle. And that until our minds are liberated and our imaginations are liberated, and we can dream for something that looks different than what we have, I think our struggle will only take us so far. So I think the work is praxis. It's of theorizing and imagination and refining our ideas and living it out in different ways, and those two continuing to inform each other, I think. And then the Black Christ, I appreciate that question. I think it's all permissible. I think that's what I love about Black theology and theologies of liberation. It's this invitation almost to play and to imagine differently and to imagine outside of the bounds of what we've been taught and given. And I think there's really incredible work of womanist and feminist liberation theologians that have done the work that you're speaking of. I think that painting was radical in its time. It's radical even now. I think in many churches still a white Jesus is very present, and white angels and white God, and to see a Black Jesus still today sometimes is shocking to people and radical. And that painting threw so much on its head, I think. In that time, that kind of challenge to the apartheid state is incredibly powerful. And I think particularly because it's on their own terms in a way. It's this religion that they're using to provide justification and legitimation for what they're doing. And so to be challenged and flipped in that way, I think was really, really incredible in '62. But I think more work needs to be done as you outline, and yeah, that work needs to continue. Yeah. Thank you.
In terms of whether we in terms of whether we can, you can? Okay. In terms of whether we can move on and forget the pain and suffering, the violence faced by Black people and no longer talk about it. I think what is missing 30 years later, it's not just the prophetic imagination. The prophetic presence, the prophetic resistance, the prophetic witness, and of course the prophetic song. In your presentation, I thought you have managed to somehow capture our imagination, even when you brought in the prophetic art. And then you have Zandi also bringing in the prophetic song. Without these elements of our imagination, we'll never go far. Because let's take the example that you used of the fees must fall. It was only then that now all of us are singing the song decolonization. We were quiet about it. We're not saying anything about it. And until now, you're talking about the walls that needs to be broken down. I mean, we're sitting comfortably as a black middle class, and we're enjoying even these walls because we're thinking they are keeping us safe whilst we are living in a dreamland. So we must just wake up. There's a saying, Vuka Daki. We need to wake up and smell the coffee to say, it's not yet uhuru. And until we find our liberation, we will never have to stop prophesying, speaking against the injustices that we are facing in this world. So I thought, let me just give that comment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me stand. I think, of course, all of us are provoked by that, you know. And at one point, I thought the question was, since the land is back, when do we move on? And in moving forward, I think the oppressed have a right and a duty to move forward with our humanity intact. And therefore, we'll sing songs, we will write poems, we will remember the forgotten. And I think the most important thing about that journey, right, is that it is not divorced from praxis. When some of us stand there, we are not just standing as academics who supported students put our bodies on the line, but we are also academics who are bringing lives in our community. When I talk about the children of Naledi, I talk about children that I went to go see their parents, their mothers, because this is what we do. Not because Naledi is in the news now, but this is what we do. And so maybe before you pose those questions, and I understand, we have been speaking about this a lot because it is necessary. In fact, we are not speaking about black suffering a lot, right? And in speaking about it, we are expressing the need for praxis. But in order for praxis to happen, the army budget must be cut. Because when we respond, bullets are always at our backs. Thank you so much.
One more. I think the last one for the evening.
Good evening. I wanted to ask, when we talk about decolonization, indigenous knowledge systems, where does religion actually stand on that spectrum? Because I've always battled the separation of the religious institutions, especially those that arrived and violated specifically, and am I able to truly decolonize my mind or say I am of an indigenous people while I still in spirits practice something that is foreign to my indigenous people. So I see concepts of Black Jesus, and to me it doesn't register. When you actually look at indigenous practices and indigenous Southern African indigenous faith systems and largely African indigenous faith systems, that Black Jesus is a foreign, even him as being Black would be a foreign concept, because even the understanding of a higher power is not God that the Webster Dictionary would tell me, but it is umdali, and which is in land, in waters, in our natural environment. So in short, where does religiosity stand for people that specifically work in IKS? And are you truly engaging indigenous knowledge systems if in a part of it is still, a part of being is still within that colonial understanding of the indigenous?
Thank you. I think we could have very long discussions about this. I won't attempt to come in as any kind of expert. I'll just say, I think we are where we find ourselves. I think one of the things that colonization does, one thing that's very central to colonization of all kinds, is the assumption of empty lands, the assumption of blank slates that people can come and paint on or inhabit or deal with as they see fit, but they think they're dealing with something from scratch. So I think that concept is important here as well, because none of us come into this conversation as blank slates. We are all a extremely complicated and intertwined mix of all our colonial history, all our indigenous history, and all these things expressing themselves in how we practice our religion, how we speak, the languages we use, all of these things. And I think because it's such a tangled mess in so many ways, I think we have to, when we think about ideas of decolonization, we have to think about it on all fronts. The decolonization needs to happen on all fronts. I've grown up within the Christian church and within the Christian tradition, and so for me, the work of Black theology that's gone before and liberation theology has been extremely helpful in thinking about what it means to decolonize my faith. I think for many other people that won't be helpful, and even the idea of Black Jesus seems like something that's not useful for their own practices of decolonization. So I think that work is so broad and wide.
Us here and encourage us to continue with this work and engaging and speaking about ways forward, and not as we remember them in action. I'd also like to thank their families for continually honoring their legacies and partaking in these events and carrying on that particular memory. I'd also want to thank Dr. Ismail for the warm welcome and chairing the entire sessions. I would also like to thank the beautiful sister that was sitting over here, I think she's left already, who gave us that beautiful poetic piece, Thandi, and that instrument, I need to get the name of that. I would also like to thank Prof. Ngosi Savulela for speaking about the call to freedom and how we practice that particular call, and just opening our minds up and encouraging us. And being a linguist, you are going at it. To the Omar and Mwabi family, those tributes were beautiful and heartening. Dr. Gamedze, your keynote has been inspiring, enlightening us on navigating liberation struggles, as well as those of the imagination, noting that these struggles are never easy to take on, posing a broader question: whose imagination do we unconsciously adopt, especially in so-called post-colonial times? I thank you for encouraging us to imagine how powerful we are in order to keep the repressive blade at bay. Sis Sandy, hi. Your contributions through your response are profound, tracing the liberation struggles, Black death, and speaking on how these struggles still persist till this day. We thank you for taking the critical and careful task of responding to Dr. Gamedze's address. To our lovely audience and attendees online as well, we appreciate and thank you for your participation, your valuable contributions, and engaging in this critical work, because in as much as we gathered here, it's important to speak on the way forward. To our collaborating organizations, the ISHS, UNISA's ISHS, SISA, and PAPU, thank you for bringing this event to life and for continuously providing the space for such an important and moving conversation. And I would also like to thank the team that set up this beautiful place. It's been a pleasure, and the chefs as well. Thank you. Handing over back to you. Just a quick announcement from the chair. There is tea and dessert outside. So as you speak with colleagues, friends, and family, grab a piece of cake, enjoy, indulge yourself. Thank you very much.
Sorry, before everyone just leaves, can all the individuals come back up on the stage just for some or small tokens of appreciation? Can we have a representative of the Mwabi family, please? A representative of the Omar family? Prof. Nkosi?